All right, so let's get started. So Clem, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about uh, your history on how you ended up going into the service, where you went into the service, and give us kind of your background.
All right. My name is Clem Blazewick. I was born and raised on the south side of Pittsburgh. The south side was uh, all mostly immigrants from Europe. People lived there, they worked there, religious life was there. Hardly ever left the south side of Pittsburgh. Uh, on June of 1965, June 2nd, 1965. A friend and I went to the federal building in downtown Pittsburgh to sign up for the Army. We gave the Army recruiter our Social Security numbers. He went in the back room somewhere. About a half hour later, he comes out and he says, I could sign you up for 3 years, but there's a letter in the mail. You guys have been drafted. So we decided that we would wait to get our letter and just go to the service for 2 years as opposed to the three. So a few weeks later, we were on our way to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for basic training. It's the first time I ever left the city of Pittsburgh. We went by train uh, and down at Fort Jackson, basic training. After I survived basic training, I was given proficiency tests and I was instructed to go to Fort Sam Houston to be a medic and a lab tech, which was ironic because as a youngster, when I would visit someone in the hospital, I typically would pass out and fall on their bed from the smell of the hospital or something caused me to pass out. Also, when I was in the service and they drew my blood, I passed out when my blood was drawn. So the Army and their proficiency test decided I should be a medic and eventually through AIT, a lab tech. And that was my two MOSs. After Fort Sam Houston,
Let me ask you one question, Clem.
yes, sir.
How did you get past the phobia for blood? How did you get past passing out?
Well, eventually those things happen. You just get over it after you do it so often. Even in the laboratory, we had to draw each other's blood. It bothered the heck out of me, but we did it so many times under controlled laboratory conditions that it just eventually got over it. So that's what happened. And so on December 25th of 1965, I boarded a C-130 Air Force C-135 plane headed to Vietnam. The engine conked out en route, and we had an emergency landing on the tiny 2.38 square mile Wake Island. As we got off the plane and walked through a dirt path going to a barracks, there was a 4 foot by 4 foot pay telephone booth and had to sign, pay, call the states $6.75 a minute. I didn't call, but I remember thinking about that. It was a pay phone. You had to have a lot of coins to put in it to call home. The island had four bowling lanes and a pool table, and a ping pong table, and that was all the entertainment for the people on the island. Um, we played ping pong. The Filipino who controlled the entertainment side of the island demanded the $20 deposit for a ping pong ball because he said they get lost and it costs money to ship them back into the island. So we did ante it up and we paid the $20, but we got our $20 back. We departed there a couple of days later, arrived in Tonsanut Airport Force Base in Saigon on the 29th of December. And we were bused to Camp Alpha, which is a holding area for incoming Army personnel. At Camp Alpha on January 2nd, I was awakened at about 11:30 at night and told to report to the helicopter pad at 0500. I was going to go to a Marine base in Quang Tri. I would be a combat medic. At about 0430, a clerk woke me up and said, "Stay here, you're not going." So I was very lucky. Otherwise, I would have been a combat medic for the Marines. 2 days later, I was sent to the 93rd Evac Hospital in Long Binh, which was about 18 miles north of Saigon. That day that I arrived there, which was about 11 in the morning, our captain introduced me to the other 3 lab techs, told me to go get the lunch at the mess hall and take my stuff down to a tent and then come right back. I came back about 1 o'clock, and doctor said, due to hematology, which was right in the front of the Quonset hut. Now, there was only one Quonset hut at that time. We were right on the one wing. The wing right next to us was the emergency room, and the other 2 wings were for the patients. That's all they had because the hospital just opened that the day before. And that was that's when I was introduced to the tragedies of war. That's when I witnessed seeing the first man die when I my first day at the laboratory, and that was very hard to accept. The laboratory, in the laboratory, our primary duties was immunohematology, hematology, and urinalysis. We weren't set up to do chemistries. Eventually, we did a little bit of bacteriology and parasitology. There was hardly a day that went by that we did not have casualties. Every day, I would say, we had casualties. The hospital eventually grew to about a 300-bed hospital, and our laboratory was moved to another site. We had a mama son who would come in and clean the test tubes. Because we had to reuse test tubes, we had to reuse syringes. We did not really have clean, sterilized equipment as you do nowadays. Typically, we had a 14-day supply of blood. If a blood shipment did not come in, we were required to donate blood. I myself donated 3 times while I was there, and we would get blood from nurses, doctors, technicians, anybody, just as well as if we needed it. Because if we had casualties come in, you really needed to get as much blood as you could. January, the first month of our operation, we cross-matched 661 units of blood. February, with only 28 days, of course, we cross-matched 907 units of blood. And in March, 882 units of blood. Now, in March, they opened up a second evacuation hospital, which is in Saigon. So a lot of the casualties were shared with that hospital. But that gives an indication of how the war was escalating by those units of blood. There's one soldier I'll never forget. He was from Colorado. He He took 66 units of blood. When he came to the hospital, one arm was missing, the other arm from his elbow down. Both legs from the knees down were gone, and there was shrapnel throughout his body. But he had a will to live. And I checked the wall in Washington, D.C. His name is not on the wall, so I'd assume that he survived those wounds that he had. One of the other duties of a lab tech was to assist doctors with the pathologists with autopsies. And that was difficult too, because you establish relationships with patients. You talk to them every day about different situations, about home, about their personal lives. You got to know them. And then all of a sudden, if they died, you had to assist on an autopsy to determine the cause of death. That was hard to accept. One of the funny stories that happened to me, my captain told me one day to take the new second lieutenant down to Saigon, down to the embassy. And I had never been to the embassy before. I'd been to the morgue, but not to the embassy. So, and I hadn't even driven a standard shift before, but I had to go up to transportation, get a Jeep, got a 45, got a rifle, and picked up the second lieutenant. Now, as I said, I never drove a standard shift before, so we just jerked all the way down to Saigon and all around Saigon. I'm driving around for about a half an hour from the morgue. I'm looking over for the embassy, and I couldn't find it. The second lieutenant sitting in the back seat says to me, "Hey, Private, are we lost?" And about that very same moment, I looked up. I saw a huge American flag up ahead. I said, "No, sir, it's right up ahead." Fortunately, it was. And so we got up into the embassy, and then from there, I asked a soldier the way to how we can get back to Highway 1 to get up to the 9030 back. I also tried to call home from there, from the laboratory one Sunday evening. It was a quiet day in the lab, and we used the Army's crank phone, and you had to crank it about a couple of dozen times and try to get into Saigon. When I got the operator in Saigon, I told him what I wanted to do to get into the city of Pittsburgh, and I gave him the phone number. I can hear him cranking away to get all the way from Saigon to Manila, from Manila into Hawaii, from Hawaii to get into San Francisco. And then from San Francisco, it was different. It wasn't any cranking anymore, but you had to get into the city of Pittsburgh. So I got all the way into Pittsburgh, but at that point, the phone was disconnected, so I didn't get the call to go through. My tour actually ended December 19th, 1966. In November of 1966, around the 14th or 15th of November, I was told by administration that my next TDY would be Camp Zama, Japan, and I can depart the 93rd on December 15th. So in the AM on December 15th, I went around and said goodbye to the other lab techs. I went to the administration, I picked up my papers, and I hitched a ride down to Camp Alpha. I got down at Camp Alpha and I turned in my papers, and the sergeant said, "Blazewick, you don't have all the papers here. You need one more paper." I didn't know that, so I ended up having to hitch a ride back up to the 93rd to get this other paper. So I get up to the 93rd and I got my papers, but it was too late and too dark to go back down to Camp Alpha. So I got back in my bunk for the night. Next day, I got up, said goodbye to everybody again, and I went to transportation to try to get a ride down to Camp Alpha, but there were no vehicles going down. Sergeant said to me, if you want to go, you got to get on Highway 1 and hitchhike a ride. So I went on to Highway 1, put my thumb out trying to get a ride. There were a lot of Lambrettas going by, and a couple of them stopped and offered me a ride, but I knew better than to take it from them. I was waiting for a military vehicle to come by. Eventually one did and took me down straight to Camp Alpha. I handed the papers back to the sergeant there, and he said, okay, you're on the manifest for December 24th. I asked him if he can move it up to a couple of days, and he denied it. He said no. So I walked away, and another GI stopped me, and he said, hey, if you want to get out earlier, go buy Sergeant a carton of cigarettes. So I went over to PX, got a carton of cigarettes. I came back, I put it on the counter. Sergeant picks up a clipboard, looks at me, and he says, you're on a manifest for December 19th. So it was moved up 5 days. That was good. Part of the processing out procedure was to be strip searched. So there was about 20 or so of us GIs were in a warehouse with all of our baggage, our duffel bags. We were marched in. We were told to strip down, empty our bags, strip down to our shorts, marched us out into another room, warehouse. They went through our baggage, whatever they were looking for, we don't know. Came back about a half hour later and told to dress up again and pack our bags, which we did. So on the 19th of December, I got on Braniff Airline Flight 284, sitting at Tonsanute Airport for, maybe about an hour. And it was quiet on the plane. The stewardess is walking through, calling my name, Clem Blazewick. I said, here I am. She says, you have to get off the plane. Your next TDY is Japan. I said, well, I haven't been home in 17 months, and I want to get home for Christmas. I'd like to stay on it. She left, came back about a half hour later and gave me instructions. She said, excuse me, we are going to reroute the plane from Tachikawa Air Force Base to Haneda Air Force Base, to Haneda Airport, the Japanese airport. Everyone is going to get off the plane. You must stay in your seat. Don't talk to anybody. And you're going to go fly right to America. So that's what I did. I stayed in my seat. Everybody left about 2 hours or so. They came back, and we were on our way to San Francisco. I processed out at Oakland Army Terminal, which was turned out to be a surreal event. One day you're in a war zone. The next day you're standing in the city street in Oakland, California. That was just hard to explain. From there, I hitched a ride, took a military bus to Travis Air Force Base. Travis Air Force Base, hitched a plane ride to Colorado. From there, hitched a ride to Dobbins Air Force Base in Georgia. From Georgia, we got on a military bus headed to Atlanta International Airport. En route to the airport, the bus broke down. We're on the highway. The sergeant told everybody to stay in the bus. He locked the door and he left across the highway over to a building to get some help. We exited through the emergency door, the back of the bus, and we hitched a ride to Atlanta Airport. And once I got at Atlanta Airport, I bought an airplane ticket to Pittsburgh, and I ended up arriving on December 21st, about 9 in the evening at Greater Pittsburgh Airport.
Do you want to talk about what happened after? Did you end up, you were supposed to go TDY. Did you end up having to serve any longer, or did you get discharged as soon as you got home?
Well, when I got to Japan, they told me I couldn't stay. You want me to get into that?
Yeah.
Well, my next duty station was Camp Zama Army Base in Japan. And I started there January 17th of 67. When I arrived at the base, my captain said, this is a 2-year tour of duty, and I'm only scheduled to be there until May 16th. He said, I must send you back. So I was sent to another holding company in Japan, and I explained to the captain there that I would like to stay in Japan and see the country and finish my tour of duty here. He called my captain up. They talked about it, and he was able to talk me into staying. But he said, I'm going to have to write your papers up for depart May 16th. I said, well, my birthday is May 15th. Is there any chance of getting home May 14th? So he said to me, I remember he said to me, you're asking for a lot. I'm keeping you here for for 5 months. And he says, you're asking for me now to send you home a couple of days early. I said, well, if you can. So he did. He gave me my DROS as May 14th of 1967. But at Camp Zama Army Hospital, that they took in a lot of patients from Vietnam. We did all the tests available to in the regular laboratory, chemistries, everything was needed to be done. And it was a very busy hospital because patients, a lot of them were flown directly from Vietnam right to Camp Zama. And we took all patients, no matter what the injuries were. That's pretty much about it for right now. So.